The antagonistic training split is by far the oldest split training system. In the early stages of bodybuilding, weightlifting, and old-time strongman, basically everybody trained the full body. A typical Monday, Wednesday, Friday full body training system was pretty much the standard back then. Now, as competitive bodybuilding grew and physique started to become more impressive, bodybuilding training advanced. Competitors realized that if they needed to dedicate more time to one individual muscle group, it made sense to train it on a different day while that muscle group was more fresh and more recovered, rather than training the arms after you've already trained the entire body for 2 to 3 hours. Now, fast forward a little bit to the early stages of the Arnold era. This split system of training became much more popular, and full body training became much less common in the sport of bodybuilding. And eventually, the first real split training system was basically the one that Arnold put on the map himself. And that's the antagonistic training split. Or more specifically, you train the chest and back, the torso in one workout, the shoulders and the arms in the next workout, the upper limbs, and finally, the entire lower body, the legs, in the third workout. Now, Arnold, when he would do this, he would train 6 days per week, hitting chest and back on Monday and Thursday, the shoulders and the arms on Tuesday and Friday, and the legs on Wednesday and Saturday. He would take 1 day off per week for rest, and that would be Sunday. And this style of training, and more specifically this split, pretty much became the standard for pre-contest training in the 60s and 70s. Similar to how most pros today use just one single body part per week training session, back then, it was the antagonistic split. Now, again, when I say that the antagonistic split was a pre-contest split, it's specifically because that's how they trained leading up to a contest back then. And another point that I've probably mentioned to death at this point is that's not how most of them would train in the off season, despite what most people think. They were generally in the gym much less often at certain times of the year, and that could be as little as 3 to 4 days per week. So just know that there are many ways you can run this split, and we're going to break down all of that in this video. We're going to talk about how and why it could be used in a pre-contest setting or for fat loss. We're going to talk about the practical application of it, how you can run it less than 6 days per week in the gym. We're going to get to exactly who should use it and what are the pros and cons of this split. But first, let's talk about exactly why this is a pre-contest split in its original form. When bodybuilders prep for shows, they need to reduce calories to burn excess body fat. They also need to expend more energy than they typically do. Today, most competitors generally do that in the form of additional cardio. But energy expenditure, that just boils down to more energy out. The saying, eat less, move more, that applies to bodybuilding as well. Now, in bodybuilding specifically, the goal is not just weight loss, but body fat loss specifically. But more importantly, losing body fat while retaining as much lean mass or muscle mass as possible. So bodybuilders need to do two things to ensure that the weight that they lose in a fat loss phase is mostly fat. One, eat enough protein to maintain muscle mass and to aid in recovery. And two, they need to keep resistance training high to keep a demand for maintaining muscle. Otherwise, the body will just burn any tissue for energy. Now, if you remember, most bodybuilders originally would go to the gym and train a full body session. Workouts were often lasting 2 to 3 hours at a time, and when it came time to prep for a show, calories were reduced. And as a result, bodybuilders would lose weight, but in addition, energy levels would drop as the diet progressed. Now imagine trying to train very hard for 2 to 3 hours at a time on very low calories. You're basically running on E. And now you finish your back training, your chest training, your leg training, but you still have work to do for the shoulders and the arms. If anyone's tried this before in a long calorie deficit, you know you're basically running on fumes at this point. And the quality of work you're performing and the sets that you do at the tail end of the workout, they're most likely going to suffer. And over time, as you see this drop in performance, the stimulus or demand that you could place on the body to maintain muscle mass becomes much lower. And as you guessed, this could lead to much more muscle loss in a diet than necessary. But now, why was the antagonistic split the natural progression here? Instead of training everything in one day, like bodybuilders were previously doing, if bodybuilders now just train the chest and the back in one session, they can cut their workout time down significantly. And since this workout was much shorter than a typical full body session, they can get in and get out before their energy levels plummet. And they could also keep the stimulus for those muscle groups very high. They can come back the next day and train the shoulders and arms to finish the entire upper body work. And then the next day they could come in and now they could train the lower body. Instead of training the legs after an entire upper body session, they now could come in on their own day and train them while fresh. In a calorie deficit, this makes a huge difference in performance and ultimately muscle retention. But that's not the only reason it was a great pre-contest split. The workouts can be cut down even more by using supersets. Using an antagonistic training split, there's no overlap to the muscles when doing this. If you hit a set of chest and then move directly to a set of back with no rest, the chest can recover and rest during a set of back. And there's actually plenty of science to back up the fact that this is a productive way of training, as antagonistic training is shown to increase strength to the opposing muscle group when doing a set. And while you're training the chest muscles, the back muscles are being stretched. And when you're training the back muscles, the chest muscles are being stretched. This actually has performance benefits for the opposing muscle group. The same thing could be done for the biceps and the triceps, the quads and the hamstrings. This split opens up the possibility for much more training volume overall as well. Because we're now training 6 days per week opposed to 3, we're burning more total calories because we're resting less days per week. And bodybuilders back then really didn't do additional cardio. So training more created a higher energy output. And since these workouts were combined in superset fashion, we not only are able to cut down on time, but we could also make up that time with additional sets. Essentially, this system was designed to cram in as much total work into one single week of training, all while keeping the quality of work done as high as possible. But now, does that mean that this is the best split for pre-contest training? No, not necessarily. While there are major benefits to this split, there's also some drawbacks as well. The main thing being training 6 days per week, it makes recovery very tricky. You have to be super meticulous about your training to ensure that you're recovering well, as you only have 1 day per week to rest. Most intermediates and beginners will burn out fairly quickly, attempting 6 days per week in the gym. And again, remember, they were using it pre-contest, so muscle gain wasn't the highest priority. It was muscle retention while burning fat. If muscle gain is your main goal, more rest days or rest days in between might help. So to run this system less than 6 total days per week, one great option that I've run many times myself is 3 days on, 1 day off, and repeat. Basically, after each leg day, you take a day of rest, and then you repeat the cycle, starting again with chest and back. This keeps the body part frequency to once every 4 days. Still training each muscle group roughly twice per week, but with more rest. You can spread that out even more as well. You could even insert a rest day before legs and after legs, spreading out the body part frequency to once every 5 days and getting more rest. There are endless options here, so don't assume that this split needs to be run 6 days per week. You can even set just 4 or 5 days per week that you train, and then just rotate through the workouts. Train on your scheduled training days and rest on your scheduled rest days, rotating through each workout. Now, the question you might have is, who should use this split? While the antagonistic split does a great job of splitting up your workouts for very time-efficient training sessions, separate training days for each muscle group, one drawback is the torso workouts. They might not be the best option for somebody that has a discrepancy in the development of either their chest or their back. For example, if somebody has a lagging back, it might not be the best option to train it after the chest. As remember, energy and focus are always going to be the highest at the beginning of a workout while you're fresh. But if your chest is well developed and you need to work on your back more, you can easily remedy this by training the back first and then just putting your chest on more maintenance mode by training it after the back. And if you're a ranked beginner, this generally won't pose much of an issue either way, and you can generally just run the program as is. But if you need to bring up both the chest and the back, and you're a more advanced bodybuilder, one body part is going to have to take priority over the other, or you might just want to train them separately. So overall, this is definitely a great split for both mass gain and body fat loss, but you need to understand how to apply it for the specific goal you're trying to accomplish. For guys that are using it to gain mass, I highly recommend inserting some rest days as needed, either a rotating schedule or a fixed weekly training split. The extra rest days will build more recovery into your program, help you get stronger, and ultimately help you build more muscle mass. My personal training style combines a lot of the benefits from this style of training, as well as other basic mass gain principles. And if you're looking to build more muscle using proven old school bodybuilding training methods, the links to my old school mass gain programs are down below in the description. And as always, if you guys want to see more of the best original bodybuilding content just like this, make sure to hit subscribe.